We are going to create a simple planning sketch using our Wacom tablet now. This will teach you the basics of how to paint in Photoshop. And this is just one way to do it, but it's a good way to start. So we're going to get a canvas in there. 8 by 10 with 300 pixels is plenty good for what we're doing. It's actually probably more than we need for a planning sketch. If you don't like the proportions, just go to the crop tool right there and drag it out to where you want it to be and hit enter. Okay, so we've got a background layer. That is going to be kind of the basic color that we put behind everything else. But I also need to get my sketch on there first of all. So I'm going to divide things into layers, and this is going to be one of the most important tips I'm giving you here. So let's create a new layer. We want everything to be in its own layer. Our top layer will be called sketch. Beautiful. And on this sketch layer, we are going to just kind of create our doodle that we're going to build everything else out of. We will go to the paintbrush. That's the main tool we're going to use. And there are different ways to change the size of the brush. You know, we can change the size and the hardness right here. We can use the bracket keys on the keyboard to change the size. But here's going to be one of the most useful ways that you change the size of your brush because it's fast. But it's also tricky. So listen close. I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to place my pen above my tablet so that it is hovering but not touching the tablet. It's just above, right? So we're not painting yet. We're just hovering above so we can move. Now I'm going to do 2 buttons. I'm going to hold down the Alt button on the keyboard, and I'm going to hold down the top button on the pen. And when I do that and start dragging back and forth, I can change the size, and by dragging up and down, I can change the hardness of my brush. This is a super easy and useful way to adjust it. So hover the pen, hold down Alt, hold down the pen button, and just drag it. So I'm going to make it super tiny right now, because for our sketch, we don't need it to be very big at all. We just want some thin lines as if we were drawing with a pen. I'm going to change it to black so I can see my sketch really well. So for my sketch, I'm going to create a Yeti having dinner alone in his cave. So I'm going to do a seat for him to be in. Rough sketch here. We don't have to worry about the details. And you can just go around and sketch out, doodle out your deal. And you don't have to get things perfectly perfect. And if I have to go over my lines a couple of times, you know, I'm okay with that as well. Next thing we're going to do is add in our background colors. So we're going back to our background layer, and it's important that we keep these separate. I don't want to put any color on the, gosh, I spelled that horrible. I don't want to put any color on the sketch at all. So on my background layer, I'm going to add the actual colors I want. Now I want a brush that's big and soft. So again, I can Alt and pen button and drag and get a big soft brush. And I'm just going to swath in some general colors. So if I go up here and I turn on this button right here, that makes it so that depending on how hard I push, the brush gets lighter or darker. So if I push really lightly, then I get something like this. If I push heavier, then I get something like this. And that's extremely handy. Next, we're going to do a different technique. We're going to create another layer above that. You might have several different layers. I'm going to create a foreground layer by clicking the layer button, and I'm going to call this foreground. Now foreground is the stuff that's close to the viewer. So all these ice formations up near the front are going to be in my foreground. That is under my sketch because I still want to be able to see my sketch, and it is over my background because you can't see anything through your background. So the trick to making your foreground easy, and this is a really great trick to remember. First off, I'm just going to block in everything with a solid brush. So I'm going to make sure my opacity is at 100. I'll just turn off the pressure sensitivity so I don't have problems there. I'm going to make sure that the brush I'm using is at a hardness of 100% because I don't want any soft edges on this layer. I'm just going to go in here and block this out. And it looks totally weird because we've got this nice soft background. But if we block it out and keep solid edges to it, it's going to be way easier to add some like that same sort of gradient only to the area that we want it. So I've got this all blocked out now, and I want to create more realism to this. I just want to add some simple light and shadows on this. So I'm going to go over and create a new layer directly above the foreground that I was working on. And I'm going to do something pretty cool. If you hold down the Alt key and click right in between those two layers, it makes the top one into what's called a clipping mask. So when you paint on this layer, it only appears on the spots where there exists something in the layer below it. So if I take a shadow color and a darker blue and I try to paint across this, it will only paint where I've got my foreground layer, which saves my background layer, which makes things beautiful and easier, because now what I can do is I can get a softer brush, soften it way up. I can turn on the pressure sensitivity again, and I can go in here and add some shadow. I don't have to worry about my shadow going off the edge of the stalactite there or in the ice column. It's not painting on my background at all. So I can just add the shadows along the edges of things. I can go back in and add highlights and just make this look more like how I want it to look. If I were wanting to make this look really more realistic, if I wanted it to be like a professional illustration I was getting out there, then I would definitely want to look at reference photos of ice and different things like that so I could get it more realistic looking. But as this is just a planning sketch and I just want to get the general feel for it, kind of concept art sort of a thing, this is good enough. And you can continue that same technique now for like the layer that the Yeti himself is on. So I can add a new layer. I'm going to put this layer underneath the foreground because we want that to hide everything. This is my Yeti layer. And I can do the exact same thing that I did on that foreground layer. So I can zoom in and just kind of block him out. And he's going to be kind of a dirtyish white with some of the blue of the cave reflecting on him. You can just block out the colors of each of the shapes that you've got going on, the table, his ice cube TV, and then you create a new layer on top of it. You again hold down Alt, click between them, and that becomes a clipping mask layer. And then I can take the shadows for Mr. Yeti, go back to a soft brush, make it pressure sensitive, and I can create some the shadow under his arm and the parts of him that are under the table, which are going to be shadowed. And this allows me also to, if I've shaded it too much, I don't have to go back with this white color and paint on top of it. Instead, I can just go to my eraser tool and knock down that shadow and then go back and do it again and say, oops, I did it wrong there. I just need to erase only my shadow. You can do the same thing with this chair. Make it look great. So now we've got most of the stuff blocked out. I won't finish the TV and things right now. But we can also add a detail layer on top of this. So we'll want to be up above our clipping mask. And add this, and we can call this like Yeti detail. Or if you've already got your shadows just exactly how you want them and you want to make it one solid thing, you can absolutely just combine these two layers. You can hit merge down, right click and merge it down so that now Yeti and his shadow are one solid thing, and that can make things easier for you. So on our detail layer, you'll notice when we turn off the sketch that actually it doesn't look as good as we thought it did. So now you can go in on your detail layer and you can start to block things out a little better. If you don't want it to look cartoony, then you probably don't want to create a hard outline on everything like this. But you could do instead some kind of hair shading and fill in. And I'm just doing it quick and sloppy. So using these techniques, hopefully you can create something that's pretty awesome.